You thought everything would get better once you broke the pattern, and for a moment, it did. You felt lighter, clearer, unstuck. But then something unexpected happened. The silence grew louder. Reality didn't respond like you imagined it would. The old was gone, but the new hadn't arrived. You're not doing anything wrong, you're just in between frequencies, and in this space between timelines, where the old reality collapses and the new hasn't yet formed, most people give up, not because they failed, but because they didn't understand what breaking the loop actually means. We often imagine transformation as a door we walk through. You close the past behind you, and the future greets you with open arms. But vibrational change isn't linear. It's atmospheric. It affects your field before it shapes your life. And that delay, the space between resonance and reflection, is where your old identity starts to echo, and your nervous system doesn't know who to be without it. This is the void, and it's not empty. It's full of unfamiliar silence, of frequencies you haven't named yet, of the new reality that hasn't anchored into your body. And this is why it feels disorienting, because your subconscious was wired for repetition, and repetition feels like safety, even if it hurt you, even if it broke you, even if it kept you small. So when the pattern ends, the body panics, not out of fear, but because the map has disappeared. The signal is silent, and what you're feeling is not regression, it's the field recalibrating. And this moment right here, this pause, this disorientation is sacred, because how you respond to the void determines whether you return to the past or enter the future. Most people loop back, not because they weren't ready, but because no one told them that after the loop breaks, the silence comes, and with it a test. Will you fill the void with your old frequency? Or will you sit with the discomfort long enough for a new one to be born? If something deep inside you knows this is exactly where you are, you're not alone, and you're not lost. You're right on time. This is the moment your signal is reprogramming itself. And if you stay here, present, honest, willing, you'll begin to feel the new pulse underneath the stillness. And if this message resonates, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Manifest Your Life. This space was created for transitions like this, where silence isn't the end, but the beginning of a new frequency. When you break a loop, you're not just changing a behavior, you're collapsing a resonance. You're disrupting the invisible pattern that kept replaying a version of you, a frequency you once called survival, identity, love. And the deeper the loop ran, the more of you it borrowed. It wrapped itself in your thoughts, your voice, your reactions, until you couldn't tell where you ended and it began. Some loops weren't even yours to begin with. They were handed to you through family, culture, fear, trauma, coded into your nervous system before you could speak. Breaking the loop means you're no longer willing to carry the program, and the program knows that. Which is why, when you interrupt the pattern, you don't just feel different, you feel unrecognizable, because every loop you break is a thread untied from the tapestry of your past. And that unraveling is beautiful, but it's also destabilizing. The mind doesn't celebrate what it can't name. The subconscious doesn't relax into what it hasn't felt before. So instead of relief, you feel anxiety. Instead of clarity, you feel fog. Instead of expansion, you feel exposed. And this is not a sign of failure. It's the signature of vibrational separation. What you're feeling is the energetic residue of everything you just refused to carry forward. The mind thinks healing is gentle, but the body knows the truth. Evolution feels like dissolution, and when you stop repeating the loop, you don't just lose the pain, you lose the reference points that made pain familiar. You lose the need to explain. You lose the rituals of self-doubt. You lose the urgency to control. But before the clarity comes, you sit in the static. You sit in the space where the old once lived, and you grieve not just what hurt you, but what defined you. Because the loop wasn't just repetition, it was architecture. It gave you walls, directions, a story. It was your echo chamber, and without it, everything goes silent until a new sound emerges. If you're still with me, it means part of you recognizes the silence we're describing. Stay with this, because as we move forward, you'll begin to see how that silence isn't emptiness, but the raw space where your new signal is forming. When you no longer feed the loop doesn't vanish quietly. It searches for you. It tries to find you through old triggers, through familiar thoughts, through people who still vibrate where you used to be. It knocks, sometimes gently, other times as chaos, but always with one goal: to see if you'll answer. Because the loop doesn't just fade, it tests your exit. You might suddenly feel drawn back into conversations that no longer serve you. Situations that mirror your past start to reappear, not to punish you, but to ask a vibrational question. Will you choose again? This is why transformation can feel cruel at first. You finally rise out of the spiral only to meet its shadow again in another form. But here's the truth. The shadow isn't real anymore. It's a memory in motion. It's an echo, and you are no longer the chamber it can live in. Still, the echo is persuasive. It wears the face of someone you loved. It sounds like your mother's voice. It whispers with the weight of your childhood. It moves through the body like nostalgia, and the nervous system doesn't know how to say no to what it once called safety. So this stage, the in-between, demands presence, not action, not certainty, just deep vibrational presence. You don't need to react. You only need to notice. Notice when your body starts to shrink back into shapes you no longer belong in. Notice when your thoughts try to negotiate with the version of you that was just released. Notice when the invitation to return feels louder than the silence that leads forward. And when you notice, pause, breathe, name it. This is the loop, seeking itself. And that simple act, naming, breaks the spell, because loops thrive in unconsciousness. They require automation. They are patterns that don't want to be interrupted, but presence is the great disruptor. You don't need to fight the loop. You only need to remain conscious long enough for it to lose momentum, and you will feel it. The moment the pattern loses grip, the moment the old thought comes but doesn't land, the moment the trigger fires but you don't move, you'll feel it as a soft clarity, a widening between stimulus and response. A space, your space. This is sovereignty, not control, not perfection, but choice, finally made available. This is how you rewire the field, not through affirmations, not through force, but through subtle refusal. Refusal to act out the old role. Refusal to speak in the old tone. Refusal to contract into the old story, not with judgment, but with deep reverence. Because the loop protected you once, but it no longer serves the signal you're becoming. So let it knock, let it echo, let it pass. You don't need to go back, you're already free. You expected things to shift the moment you shifted, but nothing moved, not right away. The external stayed silent, and in that silence, doubt returned. This is the collapse, not of your potential, but of your resonance with the old. Because every reality is built on rhythm. Everything that existed in your life, every pattern, relationship, belief, was held together by a frequency. And when you interrupt that frequency, you unplug from the matrix that sustained it. But reality doesn't fall apart instantly. It resists. It lags. It tries to stabilize. Because energy prefers repetition. It's cheaper, safer, predictable. So when you stop feeding the old signal, what actually happens is decay. But not all at once. The structure begins to weaken, the bonds start to dissolve, but the form still lingers, like a ghost. This is why it feels like you're floating in unreality. The external hasn't caught up with the internal, and that delay creates confusion. You wonder, was it real? Did I actually change? Yes, you changed. But change begins in the unseen. It begins in the quantum, in the interference patterns that no longer align, in the energetic scaffolding that starts to crumble the moment you stop holding it up. But here's the hard part. You don't get a confirmation right away. There's no applause, no clear signal that the shift worked. Just silence and space. And in that space, the mind panics, because it's not used to stillness. It equates the unknown with danger. So it tries to recreate what it knows. It replays old scenes. It reopens old wounds, not because you failed, but because the field hasn't stabilized yet. The collapse of the old isn't destruction, it's release. But that release happens through entropy, the disassembling of frequencies that were once tightly bound. And as they loosen, you feel it in the body. Fatigue, disorientation, restlessness. A deep urge to fix something, anything, just to feel control again. But this moment isn't asking for action, it's asking for reverence. The field is falling apart because you stopped feeding what no longer resonates. Let it fall, let the scaffolding break. Let the old codes lose signal. Let the invisible structures dissolve without needing to rebuild them too quickly. Because what comes next is not built by control, but by coherence. And if this message is resonating so far, this is your moment to anchor the new signal. Subscribe to Manifest Your Life so your field keeps meeting ideas that support your transformation. You're not alone in this frequency. We're rebuilding from truth, not fear. When the field collapses, it doesn't make a sound. There's no siren, no flash of light, just absence. Absence of triggers that used to rule you. Absence of urgency that used to push you. Absence of the ache you thought was part of being alive. But the absence doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like emptiness, like something's missing, like you've lost your edge. That's the withdrawal, not from a substance but from a frequency, a vibration your system was addicted to. You didn't just break a pattern, you stopped feeding the energetic charge that sustained it, and now your field is in detox. That's why you feel like floating, why familiar things seem distant and new things can't quite land. It's not that you've lost your path, it's that the field around you is resetting itself, learning who you are now. Because every time you repeated that loop, you were imprinting a signal over and over again. You trained reality to respond to a version of you that no longer exists, and now the training is breaking. But reality needs time to forget. This is when your field becomes silent, because it's waiting, it's listening, it's tuning itself to a new rhythm. And in that waiting, you might feel forgotten by people, by the universe, by the path you thought you were walking. But this isn't abandonment, it's alignment, and alignment doesn't rush. It doesn't chase. It doesn't entertain the past just to fill the stillness of becoming. What's really collapsing isn't just the loop. It's the scaffolding of your identity that was built around it. You're not just losing a pattern. You're losing the emotional hooks that held you in place. You're losing the timeline you would have lived if you hadn't made this shift. And that timeline, though familiar, no longer belongs to you. So yes, it feels like something is dying, because something is. The feedback loop that kept validating your past is dissolving. And without it, the world feels silent, not because it stopped speaking, but because it's waiting for your new voice. This is where many return to the loop, not because they want it, but because it was loud, and the silence of sovereignty feels terrifying. But if you can stay here, if you can breathe into the discomfort, you'll start to hear a different sound. One that doesn't echo, one that emerges, one that was buried beneath the noise. Your real frequency, not rehearsed, not inherited, but remembered, and it begins softly, in still moments, in slow thoughts, in breath, in tears that don't ask for explanation. In the space between identity and becoming, this is the signal beneath the signal, and it only rises when you no longer chase the noise. There's a space no one prepares you for, not the loop, not the breakthrough, but the space after, the in-between, the silent gap where nothing is wrong, but nothing feels alive either, where your mind isn't panicking, but your heart isn't lighting up, where you're no longer suffering but you're not fully receiving. This is the silence between timelines, the pause before resonance, the womb of recalibration, and it feels strange, not painful, not beautiful, just still, weightless, undefined, because you're no longer vibrating in reaction to the past, and the future hasn't fully responded to your new signal. You're between stories, between roles, between signals, and in this space, the mind has nothing to hold on to. So it reaches, it tries to make sense, it tries to fill the silence. But this space isn't for sense-making, it's for remembering that you are not your patterns, not your momentum, not even your healing. You are the awareness that watches it all fade and chooses not to rush the next thing. This silence is sacred, but only if you stay. Most don't. Most fill it with noise, with activity, with questions, with content, with anything that prevents them from truly listening. But if you stay, not as a punishment, but as devotion, the silence begins to speak, not with words, with tone, with texture, with timing, with presence. It begins to arrange you, gently, like gravity forming a star, like breath returning after grief, like rhythm emerging from stillness. This is the space where your future finds you, not because you chase it, but because you become quiet enough to match its signal. And it starts slowly, with one insight, one pulse, one moment where you feel clear for no reason, where you stop needing proof and start trusting the pulse itself. And that pulse grows, not by force, but by your willingness to remain in the space where your identity can no longer perform, where your progress can't be measured, where you no longer impress the world, because you're no longer trying to return to it. You're building something subtler, something quieter, something that doesn't need applause to feel real, something that doesn't rush to become content. You're building coherence, frequency, stability, the energetic architecture of a new self, formed not by control, but by clarity. And if this silence speaks to you, if you felt this strange in-between and stayed, leave a comment below. Tell me, what part of your old self dissolved, and what have you begun to hear in the stillness? Once your field begins to shift, the external doesn't immediately confirm it. Instead, it questions you, not with words, but with reflections, with temptations, with offers disguised as familiar comforts. These are not signs that you've failed. They are tests, but not in the way you think. Not pass or fail, not reward or punishment. They are echoes. Fragments of your previous signal reaching back to ask, are you still there? Do you still identify with this? Do you still want this version of reality? These echoes arrive gently at first. A text from someone you thought was gone, a job opportunity that matches the old pattern, a sudden surge of insecurity just when you felt stable. They arrive not as traps, but as invitations. Invitations to declare your frequency, not with declarations, but with choices. And these choices are subtle. You might be invited into an argument that mirrors your past identity. You might notice your body tighten in response to an old trigger that no longer has meaning, but still remembers its shape. This is the field checking your resonance, not to test your worth, but to confirm your signal. Because the field is intelligent, it doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to what you hold, to what you embody, to what you broadcast consistently. And after the silence comes this, the moment of witnessing, where you are offered a portal back into the old self, and you, without force or defense, simply decline. Not with resistance, but with neutrality. That's when the field shifts, not when you fight the past, but when you no longer attach to it. You'll notice this when the same situation arises, and instead of engaging, you observe, you breathe. You choose differently, not because you're proving something, but because the old frequency no longer fits. This is mastery, not perfection, not constant elevation, but subtle sovereignty. The quiet knowing that says, I don't need this loop to feel real anymore. And sometimes, the tests are louder, more dramatic, as if the universe is making one last attempt to tempt you into familiarity. In these moments, stay soft, stay anchored, don't react, recalibrate, because the external world is a lagging indicator. It takes time to reflect a new signal, and just before it does, it reflects the last trace of the old. This is where many people collapse. They interpret the recurrence as proof they haven't changed, but recurrence is not proof of failure, it's proof of transition. It means the signal is leaving your field. It means your field is stronger than the pattern that used to define you. And if you're moving through this phase, the echo phase, this is when tools become sacred. This is when journaling isn't just reflection, it's field stabilization. This is when reprogramming isn't about fixing, but anchoring the new resonance. Explore the MYL journal or our reprogramming library to help your frequency hold steady as the old tries to return one last time. You did everything right. You let go. You broke the loop. You held through the silence. You passed the echo test, and yet nothing new has arrived. Where is the new love, the new reality, the opportunity, the proof that the shift worked? This is the part no one tells you about. The field doesn't deliver instantly, not because it's slow, but because it's precise. It's not withholding, it's preparing. And what it's preparing is you. Because vibrational coherence is not just about frequency, it's about stability. You don't receive what you visit, you receive what you become. And becoming isn't an event. It's a residence, it's a presence, it's a field that holds even when nothing is confirmed. This is the vibrational gestation period, the liminal space where your signal is no longer about momentum, but about endurance. The universe is not ignoring you, it's aligning you. And alignment doesn't rush, it calibrates, it watches. It checks for consistency. It protects what's becoming from being infected by what was. So if the new hasn't arrived yet, it's because you're still stabilizing as the version of you that can hold it, not attract it, not manifest it. Hold it, sustain it, not lose it the moment discomfort arises. The field doesn't just respond to clarity, it responds to capacity. And the capacity for a new timeline is built in the quiet moments when you don't collapse into waiting, but relax into becoming. Waiting is heavy. It drags, it tightens, it makes you look outside for confirmation, but becoming is light. It expands, it settles, it moves from within, and the longer you can remain in coherence without evidence, the more precisely you're next. Reality is sculpted, not from fantasy, but from frequency, not from demand, but from resonance. And yes, this space will stretch you. It will challenge your old definition of trust, because trust here doesn't feel like certainty. It feels like stillness. It doesn't feel like motivation. It feels like neutrality. It doesn't feel like action. It feels like alignment. And alignment isn't loud. It doesn't shout its way into reality. It hums. It glows. It calls the future with a frequency that only silence can hear. So if nothing's arrived yet, you're not behind. You're not blocked. You're not broken. You're stabilizing. You're rooting. You're becoming a field that can hold the life you used to chase. Because the new doesn't enter until it knows it's safe to stay. And you are becoming that safety, not for others, for the reality you were always meant to embody. The new reality won't announce itself. It won't come with fireworks. It won't post a sign that says, You've made it. It will arrive quietly, softly, through synchronicities that feel natural, through moments that feel oddly familiar, like you've already lived them in a dream. That's the sign you're sustaining the signal. Not because something happened, but because you became the version of you that no longer needs it to. This is what it means to hold the new field, to stop checking, to stop scanning the world for confirmation, to stop negotiating with doubt every time your ego gets bored of the silence. Because sustaining the field isn't about holding your breath. It's about breathing differently. You walk differently. You speak slower. You react less. You watch more. You anchor deeper. You let the energy of your new self enter your cells, your tone, your thoughts, your nervous system. And this takes practice, not as discipline, but as devotion. Devotion to this new rhythm that doesn't rush. Devotion to this new you that doesn't perform. Devotion to this frequency that feels so clear, you don't need to explain it. And yet, you will be challenged. Not by others, but by the version of you that used to chase instead of attract, that used to collapse instead of recalibrate, that used to fight instead of breathe. So sustaining this new field means learning to recognize the subtle ways your system tries to go back. It might come as restlessness, a sudden urge to fix something, a craving for drama or urgency, not because you're broken, but because the body remembers intensity as a marker of aliveness. But you don't need intensity anymore. You don't need chaos to feel real. You don't need the loop to feel seen. Instead, you build a rhythm, one breath at a time, one choice at a time, one act of gentleness at a time. And this rhythm builds coherence, and coherence builds gravity, and gravity calls the new reality to you not as a prize, but as a match. And yes, tools help. Journaling helps you witness the subtle. Meditation helps you clean the noise. Movement helps you shake the static. Stillness helps you harmonize. Laughter helps you release tension. Sound helps you regulate the signal. But nothing replaces presence, because the true tool is the awareness that chooses again and again and again to stay aligned even when no one's watching, even when nothing's happening, even when the world still looks the same. Because that's when the field solidifies, when you become so familiar with your own signal that you no longer chase, you transmit. And when you transmit, the quantum listens. And when it listens, it begins to reflect, quietly, accurately, consistently. This is how timelines bend, not with force, but with fidelity, to your truth, to your resonance, to your real self, unapologetically, unwaveringly anchored. Creation doesn't begin with action, it begins with clarity, and clarity doesn't shout, it whispers. After the collapse, after the void, after the test, a pulse begins to rise. You don't know what it is yet, but it's soft, consistent, and it doesn't come from fear. It doesn't urge you. It doesn't seduce you. It doesn't promise anything. It simply arrives, and you notice. Not because the world changes, but because you do. You pause longer before speaking. You feel what's yours and what's not. You no longer entertain timelines that diminish you. That's when you know you've crossed over. Not fully, not yet, but something foundational has shifted, and the world starts to reflect it. A small opportunity, a stranger who speaks in exact resonance, a choice that feels light, aligned, alive. These aren't random. They're not accidents. They're echoes of the new you, proof that the field is reorganizing around your signal. This is the moment many people miss, because they expect the shift to be cinematic, obvious, public, loud. But real creation begins in whispers, in alignment that doesn't need an audience, in subtle moments that feel like coming home to something you didn't know you lost. And now, you begin to choose from this space, not react, not compensate, not manage the perceptions of others. You choose not to fix the past, but to plant the future. And these choices feel different. They don't require justification. They don't create friction. They create resonance. And that resonance ripples through your timeline, through your relationships, through your work, through your presence. And suddenly, you're not manifesting out of need. You're emanating out of coherence. This is the power that comes not from achieving, but from remembering. You remember what it feels like to not betray yourself, to not chase the next hit of external proof, to not negotiate with frequencies that no longer live. In your field, you become a living signal, and the field finally responds, not with a bang, but with rhythm, precision, grace. You're no longer reaching, you're receiving, not because you stopped wanting, but because your wanting no longer comes from lack. It comes from vision, from peace, from the deep sense that what's meant for you is already orbiting your field. And you can feel it, not through logic, but through sensation. The body becomes lighter, your breath deepens, synchronicities feel softer, but closer. You don't need to analyze them. You simply recognize them. This is not the old manifestation model. You're not projecting energy outward, hoping something will return. You're allowing life to organize around you, around the integrity of your inner alignment. And that alignment, it's magnetic. It doesn't hustle, it doesn't perform. It doesn't collapse to make others comfortable. It simply is. This is the shift from survival to stewardship, from control to conductivity, from fear to field. You begin to understand that reality is not static, it's relational, it mirrors. And what it mirrors now is no longer your wounds, but your coherence. You don't need to repeat mantras to convince yourself. You don't need to visualize harder. You are the visualization. You are the field, and that is enough. This is where decisions become declarations, not for the world, for your frequency. You choose things that match your energy instead of trying to adjust your energy to match things. This is where your timeline stabilizes, not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer swayed by temporary disturbances. You become less dramatic, more steady, more clear. You start saying no to things that once defined your entire identity, not with resentment, but with clarity. And that clarity echoes in the way people respond to you, in the doors that open, in the timing that aligns. This is when you start to understand what creation truly means. It's not about changing the world to fit you. It's about becoming so whole that the world reorients itself around your presence. And that presence, it's quiet, it's powerful. It doesn't need proof anymore. You are the proof. You've crossed the void, you've broken the loop, you've survived the silence, and now you're standing at the edge of a life that finally reflects your frequency. But here's the truth. No one tells you. This is not the end. This is the beginning of conscious creation. Everything before this was recovery, realignment, repatterning. Now, you build, not from scarcity, but from center, not from urgency, but from rhythm. And this building, it's subtle, it's sacred, because it comes from the you that no longer needs to prove anything. You don't need to hustle your worth. You don't need to perform your awakening. You don't need to chase timelines that were never yours to begin with. You've returned, and from here, everything becomes different. Not because the world changes, but because you meet it differently. You speak to it differently. You hold space for it without bending your own light. You are no longer someone searching for signs. You've become the signal. And now the question becomes, what will you choose to generate from this frequency? What version of reality will grow from your stability, your presence, your truth? You are no longer trapped in a loop, but the field will continue to mirror who you are. So stay honest, stay soft, stay sovereign, because this journey doesn't end, it deepens, and each layer of coherence invites the next. Each act of presence builds the next portal, and when the next challenge arrives, you won't collapse. You'll respond, not from fear, but from embodiment. This is what freedom feels like. Not loud, not chaotic, but real, silent, rooted. And from this place, creation becomes inevitable. If you felt this message resonate, if you recognized yourself in this frequency, subscribe to Manifest Your Life and like this video. It tells the algorithm you're choosing this new timeline. And in our next video, we'll explore the signs your new timeline has truly anchored and how to respond when quantum shifts begin manifesting around you. Your loop is broken, your path is clear, and the field is already listening.